said is one of the foundational concepts from for programmatic marketing, right? And we have obviously looked at we've obviously looked at incrementality in the past. In fact, I'll take another session on incrementality. I've not gone through. We've not fully done incrementality. I think we've sort of done regression, which is like an analysis on incrementality. But I'll probably cover incrementality maybe in much more detail maybe in the coming series. But marginality is a concept that sits on top of incrementality, right? So the idea is how do you take so a simple definition of increment of marginality is something like if you sort of spend one more dollar, how do you get a similar? Will you get a similar performance, or you get better performance, or will you get worse performance? Right now, this is a very simple concept to understand, and intuitively we understand this, and we already utilize it. Right? Most of our analysis, we understand this, right? But just having a name to it and sort of doing a few analysis will make it much more concrete, right? Typically, what happens is we look at something called an average return. So if you look at ROAS or even a CPA, all of these are average numbers, right? We say what is a CPA, and if somebody says a CPA is 1,000 rupees, that means that you've spent 10,000 rupees and then you got, let's say, 10 orders, right? So the CPA is 1,000. But that's not actually true. The first order would come at a different CPA, the second order would come at a different CPA. And this is true for all of the channels. It is true for Facebook, it is true for AdWords, it is true for marketplaces like Amazon and Flipkart. This is pretty much true everywhere, right? And that's why the idea of marginal returns is very important, right? Because tomorrow, if I ask you to increase your revenue by 20% or increase your orders by 20%, you should know which of your channels are working well or which of your campaigns are working well, and you should know what is the marginal CPA or marginal return for each of your campaigns, right? So that you can confidently say, I can take this 20% and I can put it on a certain campaign or a certain channel, and you will be able to get that extra 20% orders at the least possible CPA. It will not be lower than 1,000, because if it was already lower than 1,000, you would have already gotten it into the picture, but it would not be 2,000 rupees. It would probably 1,100 rupees or so, right? So this is very important that way, right? So you should. So we'll also, when the presentation, we'll see at what sub level should you be looking at marginal CPAs and marginal returns, right? So this is the concept at broad level. Very easy to understand, very intuitive. You already know it. We already do it in most of our analysis, right? And that's what is marginal returns. And I mean, if you look at it from, this is also true almost of every aspect of life, right? There is always a diminishing marginal returns for almost everything. Initially, you want to add a new channel. It obviously, anytime you add a new channel, historically, and in fact, theoretically, any new channel that you add improves performance overall, right? And which is why they say you should have as many channels as possible, because it improves reach, it improves recall, it improves all of the attributes of your main creative, right? So, but as you keep on increasing spends on a certain channel, what happens is obviously it will start diminishing, right? The first 100 rupees is not the same as the second 100 rupees. And then after a certain time, in fact, it will also be negative. Why will it be negative? Is because you've probably started hitting thresholds of you started hitting ceilings. And maybe you increased frequency on a certain channel, right? We'll actually see why it hits diminishing returns, right? So one is message frequency, like I said, right? If somebody is seeing your ad 5 times on Facebook, maybe it is okay, frequency is good. But if somebody is seeing you 20 times, that guy would get irritated and then he would probably report you, right? So the more you show it, the higher your CPA will be, right? Audience expansion. I mean, for the first 100, 200 rupees, you are saying, or not 200 rupees, let's say for the first 5 lakh rupees that you're spending on a day, you want tier 1 and tier 2. The next 5 lakh rupees that you're spending is going to tier 3, where usually CPA is higher because of just market, because of just dynamics, right? People don't have that much of spending power. And because you are going after those fringe audiences, CPA would start going up. So you'll start seeing diminishing results. And third one is marketplace dynamics, because obviously we're looking at supply versus demand auction marketplaces. The more you bid beyond a certain point, you will start seeing diminishing returns, right? So it is important for us to understand what can the channel or sub-channel or a campaign or an ad set can scale to, right? And are you able to juice out a channel to its fullest extent, and after what point are you starting to hit a ceiling, and then it's starting to sort of come down, right? This is typically what we do, right? If you look at our stacks reports or any of that sort, typically when you say what is the average CPA, let's say your average ROA, your typical ROA, let's say, is around you spend $5 and you got 10, right? Which means that your ROA is, let's say, 200%, right? But in reality, this is slightly different, right? Typically, the first dollar you spend, you'll probably get $4. The second dollar that you spend, you get $2.5. The last dollar that you spend, in fact, you're actually losing $0.25. You'll only get 0.75, right? So you will say this is also true for your CPA, right? Let's say you'll get the first order at maybe $1, but then the last order that you want, the fifth order that you want, will probably come at $5, right? So it's very important for us to sort of look at this analysis and then sort of figure out, should you cut budgets on a certain channel, should you scale budgets on a certain channel, and then on certain campaigns, right? So theoretically, this is what marginality is. Again, like I said, it's very simple. It's just that we are sort of putting a name to it, right? We sort of talk in different languages. On Facebook, guys talk about these as stacks and wastage, because that's what they're saying. They're looking at, okay, what are the different stacks? The first 100 orders are coming at what? Second 100 orders. So they're looking at which stacks to cut and which stacks to sort of scale. AdWords guys sort of look at it from a slightly different point of view. They look at marginal CPAs by sub-channels. They don't really look at stacks in a certain sub-channel as yet, right? We've not gone into that granularity yet because we're not spending a lot of money on each of the sub-channels yet. Marketplaces, we've just started off. So marketplaces, in fact, this is the first month where we're looking really at marginality analysis. And this is what you're sort of doing on ROI campaigns. Well, like, in fact, there's a certain slide in the PPT where your current experiment, you'll have to the output has to sort of look as per that slide output, right? So we're just starting to see that in marketplaces now that we're starting to spend a lot of money there too, right? So let's just look at a simple example. Now, let's say there's a company called Monday.com, which is the HR-based CRM, right? And what they're saying is they want a 33% return rate. When I say return rate, they're talking about they want a net return of 33%. That means they want to grow profitably, right? And they are saying for every $1 spent, they want to see a 33% return on that spend, right? Let's just say that is the assumption. And they are doing all of this, right? It's the same thing as what we're doing. They have all of these channels. They have SEM non-brand, SEM brand, they have Facebook, they have YouTube, they have LinkedIn, programmatic display, and direct mail. We don't do direct mail, but let's just assume that they have all of these channels. Now, average bid column that you're seeing is what is the programmatic bid on that particular channel, right? You could think of it as CPA, you could think of it as cost per click, you could think of it as whatever. It could be anything, right? Now, they have a certain average bid for each of these sub-channels. So 0.75, you can assume it to be a CPC thing, you can assume it to be a CPA thing. So don't worry too much about it. It's just the bid that they have for that particular campaign on that particular channel, right? And for that bid, they are spending, let's say, around this much amount of money. So the totaling amount is working out to be $19,000. And they're generating a revenue of around $69,000, right? So this is what they're spending, and this is what they're getting in revenue. Gross return is nothing but what is the profit that they're making, right? So gross return is they're making a return of around $50,000. Now gross return is just total revenue minus cost of servicing. It will not be cost of servicing means basically cost of ads, right? Here in this case, because it's all CRM, there is no other cost of the product, any of the jazz. It's just cost of the ads and then cost of the revenue. Net return is minus all of the other stuff, which is minus, let's say employee cost, minus office cost, and minus all of that, whatever, right? Office cost and all will probably not come here. It's just minus that particular sub-channel cost, which is, what is the, you can think of it as what is the other amount of money that you're spending on that particular sub-channel. It could be in terms of the amount of people sitting there and all of the jazz, right? So you have revenue, so you have gross return, and then you have net return, right? So this part, till this part it is clear. So there is a certain amount of bid on each of these channels. There is a certain amount of spend on each of these channels. Each of those channels are generating revenue, and there is a certain return on it, which is nothing but revenue minus spend. And there is a net return on it, which is, let's assume that is actually 33% of whatever that is sort of making, right? So there is a certain net return on it minus some fixed cost that particular sub-channel has, right? And so which means that for $19,000 spend, they are generating a net return of around $4,000. Now the let's say the CMO or whoever is asking, now I want to increase the spend by X amount, but I want to increase the profitability by Y amount, right? So this is what we are saying. Now, what are we trying to do in our day-to-day operations? We are saying we are at a revenue of around 20 crores. In India, we are at a revenue of, let's say, 18 crores, and we have a CM2 of, let's say, I don't know, Indian CM2 might actually be around, let's say, minus 50 or something, minus 50 actually, right? And we are saying, let's go from 18 crores to 25 crores without any hit on the CM2. In fact, CM2 has to turn positive, right? So we're saying, let's go from 18 crores of revenue to 25 crores of revenue, and also see if we can make CM2 positive, right? If that is the objective, then how do you spend on each of these channels? What are the channels that we have? We have Facebook AdWords and then now marketplaces, right? So how do you spend that money? We are spending almost, let's say, 10 crores a month. How do you want to spend that money to ensure that you get to 25 crores and slightly turn positive? So that's the business objective. Now, let's just look at what these guys are doing. So they're saying 33% return, right? Now, if you so this is what it is, right? So this is the same slide basically, right? They just made into which ones are turning positive, which ones are turning negative. Otherwise, it's the same slide, right? Now, what you will have to do is now we're looking at marginality, right? Can we increase the bids by plus or minus 10% and then see what will happen to that particular sub channel, right? Now, this is the same question that we're asking. So if I say that, we are spending roughly around 10. So I'll take one particular example. We're saying we are spending roughly around close to around 11 lakh rupees on Vedics a day, right? On Vedics women a day, right? Now, do you want, if I say let's just spend 12 lakhs, where should that extra 1 lakh go to? Which will give us probably a positive return, right? So they are taking this bit and then first they're decreasing the bit by minus 10%, right? So the same 0.75 bit that is becoming 0.68, right? 0.15 bit is becoming 0.14. Like they've taken everything and they've reduced everything by 10%, nothing else, right? And they've realized that if they spend, so instead of spending $19,000, they are now spending $15,000. The revenue is 60,000 and they're generating a net return of around 4.124, right? So change in net return percentages, what we've seen in the past to this, is this a percentage of that, right? So this is a simple thing. If you just decrease your bid by X percentage, which is the same as saying if you decrease your CPA from, if Vijay is having a display, so there's a smart display campaign with a CPA of, let's say, 500 rupees, if he's making it 450 rupees, which is a minus 10% bid. Or Rajesh is having a CPA of around 800 rupees. Now, there is no bid as such for Rajesh because he's using a cost control, but let's just assume that, he's saying, I don't want 800 rupees, I want 750 rupees. Then what would he be bidding? So this is the same thing, right? Now, after this is the same stuff again. OG is the original net return that we got, which is around $4,100. Minus 10%, by the way, after you cut your cost also, net return has remained the same. Now, why is that? Is because some channels, the marginal CPA was high and then that sort of reduced, obviously, because you've cut your cost by around 10%, right? Now, I'm assuming that the cost has gone down by 10% yet, but it roughly happens when you sort of do that to your bids. Now, let's just see what happens if you increase your bid by 10%, right? Instead of 0.75, now you're bidding 0.83, right? Now the same thing, you're now, instead of spending $19,000, you're spending $24,000, which is a 10% increase in cost. In fact, it's not a 10% increase in cost because it's a 10% increase in bid. So it went up, in fact, by $5,000. Revenue went up, gross return went up, net revenue went down. Now, why did net revenue go down? Obviously, it's because some channels here have a very bad marginal return, right? So in fact, you'll see the change in net return is minus 25%, which means 4,000 net return where it was in the past has become 3,000, which means you actually lost $1,000 in profit, which is a minus 25% change in net return, right? So this is the same slide again, right? Now, what are you trying to do, right? So we looked at total amounts, but the idea is there are some channels here where you should probably increase the bid because the net percentage increased. There are some channels here where you have to decrease the bid because the net percentage again decreased. And some channels here that are sort of almost the same, which means that the profitability has not really changed. Now let's look at that, right? So if I look at OG, which is the original spend, which was around $19,000, this is the net return that we got. Now here net return they're doing is in terms of absolute amounts. Now for us, we can probably replace net return with maybe a CPA, or you can in fact replace net return with revenue, because for you net return is almost the same, because for us we don't really have profitability by different sub channel, right? We are sort of selling the same products everywhere. So you can actually, instead of doing net return, we can just look at revenue. So instead of taking this slide, for you to make it easy, you can say, what is the original revenue that I got? If I reduce the bits by 10%, what is the revenue that I got? If I increase the bits by 10%, what is the revenue that I got? And what did I spend before? What am I spending now? And based on that, should I be increasing the bits or decreasing the bits or keeping the bits constant? You will see that in some cases here, like in YouTube, it has almost remained constant, because there is no point in increasing or decreasing it. If you increase it, you've actually had a decrease in if you increase the bid, you had a decrease in net return. If you decrease the bid, you had a decrease in net return, right? So you sort of, in that case, want to keep it flat. But in some sub channels, you want to increase the bid. In some sub channels, you want to decrease the bid, right? Do you have any questions still here? It's a very simple concept. Now, just for you to make it easy, you can just think of it as revenue as opposed to return. Now, they are saying they want to grow profitably. So they are saying they want to see net profits, which is what the $4,000 is. But for us, we are not looking really at profitability. We are saying, let's just ensure that profitability is almost the same. Let's just look at the revenue, right? So you can just think of it as revenue. Are there any questions still here in terms of, are you not understanding anything more that you want me to explain here? Okay, so I assume that all of you, is somebody making noise?
So Sangram, even if there is like little increase in revenue, you increase if you don't look at the percentage increase.
Yeah, see, for us, basically, if you're saying, see, there is a certain CM2 target also, right? It's not like we just want to keep on increasing revenue without a CM2 target. But I will say, if your revenue is going up, while ensuring that the CM2, I don't care about CM2 percentage as such. We're saying CM2 contribution has to be positive. That means, let's say, let's take an example. Let's just say in marketplaces you're doing 1 crore in revenue, and you have a current CM2 of around 25%, which means for 1 crore you're making 25 lakhs in profit. Now, ideally, I want you to do 2 crores, but if you say 25% on 2 crores is 50 lakhs, but you're saying, because I've increased revenue, my net profit went down. We don't really require 50 lakhs. We are fine with 25 lakhs going to 35 lakhs. So which one would I choose? Should I choose 1 crore and 25 lakhs, or should I choose 2 crores and 35 lakhs? I would choose 2 crores and 35 lakhs. Right? Which means that you have some flexibility on increasing ads. If ads are enabling you to get to that extra 1 crore, without spending too much.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah. And this is not true in just marketplaces, is also true in everywhere else. Like, for example, Vijay can say, I'm spending 50,000 in YouTube and it is generating X amount of revenue at Y amount of CPA. Now, as long as the Diablo CPA is X, you can keep spending it. Now, it is not a very straightforward thing in sub-channels, because it's not one thing. You have 5 things, right? You have to say, if I have to spend that extra 1 lakh rupees, is YouTube the best bet? Is Facebook the best bet? Is display the best bet? Or, do I have discovery? Then you have to look at each and every sub-channel marginality and then take a call on this. It's not very clear or straightforward. But it's also not very straightforward in marketplaces also, because now you have ROI campaigns and CPC campaigns and all of that. Okay, so that's that. Now, so this is what it is, right? So basically what they have done is, if you sort of adjust it by doing this, you actually came to this scenario, which is amazing. So originally you were spending $19,000, you had a revenue of $69,000, you had a net return of $4,100. But after you adjusted margins, which is in some cases it went up, in some cases it went down, in some cases it remained flat, we spent actually lower, right? We spent 9% lower. The revenue decreased only 5%, but profit increased 15%. So for them, as Monday.com Monday.com is almost like a $10 billion company, right? So they are not really looking at growth at all costs, they're looking at profitably growing. So for them, this is a better scenario, right? So the margin adjusted scenario is better for them than the original scenario, right? For us, like I was saying, we want to increase in revenue. So I would say, increase your spends by 5%, but increase your revenue by 10%, while maintaining the net return of like almost 0. I don't care really about CM2 at that point, as long as the CM2 is not turning negative, right? So that's what we are sort of going after, because we are much more of a growth-oriented startup as opposed to a profit-oriented startup. Okay, so that is the scenario here. Any questions still here? Again, I mean, this is a simple, intuitive concept to understand, not complicated whatsoever. I think if you start doing it, like which we'll do exercise over the next 2-3 weeks, it'll become very clear. Now, what you have to do is, obviously, this is the quantitative understanding. You have to also match that with qualitative understanding of the channel attributes, right? We'll see how that is, right? Now, what are the challenges for estimating this is some channels don't provide any forecasting, right? The best channels that we've seen that actually provide very accurate forecasting is Google, right? If you actually do Google generic search, which we don't do a lot of, if you do generic search or if you do display, these, like Google has so much of data that it can actually predict how much you can spend and what will be the targeted CPA and how many number of orders you can expect. They in fact show you a graph that is clear. In fact, the graph doesn't change as much. In fact, you can just blindly trust the algorithm and then give it to Google and then say, you do the job, right? You don't have to do anything. Google takes care of it, right? But it's not true for all channels. Facebook does it to a certain extent, but not to a lot, right? And past channel performance is not equal to future channel performance. There's obviously that stuff, and obviously there's some seasonality and channel saturation and others, right? Let's look at another example. Now, this is sort of is like a similar example as the previous one. I just put it here because maybe you'll get a few more ideas, right? So, like I said, marginal performance, you can think of it from a revenue point of view. You can think of it from a profit point of view. Right? Let's look at an example again. Bloomscape is a shop that sells plants, indoor plants. And let's say non-brand search is what they're picking, right? So non-brand search, like I said, generic search, Google sort of has very good predictive capabilities, right? So they're also targeting 30%, which is a net return. They're saying after removing cost of plants and other expenses, they want to get a 30% return on profit, on revenue. And their average order value is around $200, right? So how do you typically map this out is you start with the 0%, which is your current one, and then you use your forecasting tools. Now, because it is non-brand search and because Google can do this, you can actually write it down right away. You don't even have to test this. But if it is any other channel, you can actually test this, right? So this is what Google is predicting. Google is saying if your bid is right now, whatever your bid is, you're getting around 2,800 clicks, right? Which is so which is this part. So if you're currently at this 0%, you're getting around 2,800 clicks. Your cost of those clicks is around $2,500, for which you're generating 550,000 impressions and you're getting 105 conversions. So this is what you have. And Google predicts that if you decrease the bid by X percentage, let's say you're bidding on clicks and let's say your CPC is $1, right? If you're bidding $0.9, this is what you'll get. If you bid $3, this is what you'll get, right? So this is what it is saying. Now, obviously, you can calculate the revenue, which is nothing but $199 into $200, which is the AOV, right? And net return is nothing but what we said, 30% is what you're making after everything goes away in this product, which means that if you spend $39,000, you get into 30% is the net return, right? So, which is let's say $10,000 or whatever. But you have to subtract the media cost, right? So you have a negative net return of around minus 330, which is minus 1%. Right? If you do 200%, your revenue is $37,000, which means 30% of that is, I don't know what is 30% of that. Let's say again $10,000, but your media cost is only $9,700, right? Which means that you're generating a net of around $1,500. So you can now say at what bid do you have the best possible output, right? So it looks like if you're really targeting net return of the highest amount, right? This looks like a good combination if you sort of want, or in fact, if you're saying no, this combination actually I think is the best one, right? You're making 3,770 at a 17%, which is very respectable, right? So if you are growing profitably, you want to target 10% more only, right? But if you are if you're growing after growth, which is our scenario, right? If you are saying what do I want? I want this one, right? So I'm saying I want this one. Why? Because one, this has the highest amount of revenue, right? And at the same time, it is giving positive net return. Positive net return means CM2 positive, right? It is still generating a profit, right? So we want this. This is what we're going after. But if you're a profit-oriented company, you would probably want to go after this one because you're saying, okay, this is probably not this one, sir. The next one. I can't do it, but that's what I'm saying. So you probably want to go after this one, right? So this one. So very simple concept, right? You guys can now say, okay, what should you be doing? You should be doing this. You should be saying, can I increase my bids wherever possible? Can I spend more? Can I increase the revenue, but not make any losses? Which means that your marginal CPA has to be a good marginal CPA. Okay, so that's that. Same thing. This net return, we're just plotting on a graph. What is the maximum CPC that you're bidding on, and what is the net return that you're getting? And this is the same graph. This is a diminishing marginal return graph. So you're seeing that if it is minus 50% bid, you're having the highest net return, obviously because you're getting only the most profitable clicks. And as the bid changes, it is going up to a certain point, and after that again there is diminishing marginal returns. Same graph that we saw initially, right? Yeah, this is just revenue, this is not profit. So you'll see that this is not a diminishing marginal returns. Yeah, so this is what from a marketplace point of view, what you're doing on your ROI campaigns, right? So right now you're saying you're spending how much? Let's say you're spending 6,000 rupees a day, and your ROI campaign is generating, I don't know, like 50,000 rupees a day, and you're saying net return, you can just estimate. Your net return probably is 25% of that, right? So you can say 25%. Now, what do you want to do, right? You want to keep on increasing that as long as your net revenue is increasing, right? And you estimate that 25% of that. Now, I'm not considering AOV into picture because I'm just saying on every net revenue will make 25% because on every product we make 25%. Maybe that assumption is not right, but it's a safe assumption. You can probably take 20% because maybe there are some products where the AOV is lower, but you can say 20% of revenue you can always take as CM2 and then say, is that working out for you, right? There will be a certain point at which you will have a ceiling where you're saying, okay, I'm going from 3,000 rupees on the ROI campaign, which is generating 50,000 rupees, to 5,000 rupees generating 25,000 rupees. Maybe at 10,000 rupees, it will only generate 30,000 rupees. 30,000 rupees, 25% is around 7,500, which means you're spending 10,000, you're generating only 7,500 of profit, at which point it is not a great thing, right? So that's how you calculate it. Okay, so this is this. Yeah, this is just these are just different things depending on what your company objective is, right? Now, what are the different ways of measuring marginality, right? So on this axis we have how accurate will my results be, which is your y-axis. If you do certain kind of test. X-axis is how much effort will it take for you to sort of do it, right? So the best test that you can do is a geographic lift test. Now we have studied about lift tests in the past when we were doing incrementality, I think 1.5 years ago, whatever. A geographic lift test is nothing but you are sort of showing ads in one geography and then not showing ads in another geography and then seeing what will happen if you increase the bid on a certain campaign, right? Now, this is a very straightforward test because it will tell you exactly how the audience is reacting or how a channel is reacting to your increase and decrease of spends. Now, the only problem with this is this takes a lot of effort because you have to do a geographical test, which takes a long time, right? The best thing that you can do, which I think we should do, in fact, is high-level regression analysis because you already learned about regression. Now, regression will not only tell you about incrementality, but it will also tell you about marginality, right? Now, we have done extensive regression analysis, you know which parts are incremental. Now, what you will do is you will take one channel and then you will do regression on the same channel as opposed to doing regression across channels, right? Which means that if you are saying Facebook acquisition main campaign is an incremental campaign, and you are saying I'm spending 2 lakh rupees and you're getting X amount of CPA, you want to go from 2 lakhs to 3 lakhs to 4 lakhs to 5 lakhs to 5 lakhs, 6 lakhs, 7 lakhs, like that. Now you're looking at what is the marginal CPA looking there like, and if you have a history of that, it will tell you very clearly. You can sort of draw a graph and then say, okay, this is probably the max that this particular campaign can sort of do, right? So as opposed to doing multiple sub-channels regression, now you'll be doing only one sub-channel regression on only one, and then see at what point it is hitting a ceiling. We'll sort of look at more of that in the PPT, right? If that is also taking more effort for you, you can do platform tools. Platform tools is nothing but, as I showed you, Google does a very good job of just predicting. You don't even have to do a marginality test because Google is very good at understanding. Like I said, a non-brand search, as we've seen, it is very easy to create a graph like that, what we've seen with Bloomscale. Or if you do smart display, it is again very easy for you to sort of create a graph like that. YouTube, it's not there because I think it can't predict, but there is some amount of accurate analysis that can sort of show you. Facebook, I think, also does it for a few things, but it's not as, what I've seen with Facebook is it's not that accurate. Okay, and live testing is something that we do, right? Which is just increase and then see what will happen, decrease and then see what will happen. Live testing is ad hoc, but the good thing about live testing is it is very flexible, right? Because past data, you don't have to rely on past data, you can do it in the present. And most of the times, the good thing with live testing is it's also very accurate, right? So what we will sort of rely on mostly is regression and live testing because geographic tests are a pain, right? Regression, if you have a lot of data, live testing is something that we do anyway, which is you just increase and then see what will happen for a week, for 10 days. And if it's good, you keep it. If it is not good, you decrease it. All right, so measurable channels, like I said, Facebook and Google will sort of give you. The good thing about YouTube is I think campaign drafts and experiments were there, but I think it's not that clear. Okay, this is the same stuff. High-level regression analysis, right? So regression analysis, like I said, if you have a lot of data, it makes it very easy to do it. The only drawbacks is historical performance is not an indicator for future, which we know. And channels and target audiences can keep changing, right? You're not targeting the same set of audiences all the time. Your main, like if you look at Facebook and main campaign, it is not always the same set of people that you're targeting. So it can also probably change. And obviously it needs a lot of data. Okay, now what we will do is, I want you guys to sort of do this for the next session. I want you to say input is nothing but your historical spend on a channel, right? So I want you to say, if you are saying I'm spending, let's say, again, from a marketplace point of view, if you're taking the ROI channel, how much have you spent? This is on the x-axis, right? And what are the returns on the y-axis? Now you can say returns is nothing but revenue. Like you can just put revenue or you can put profit, but let's sort of put revenue. You will get a plot like this. So input is nothing but your time. It's your data points on inputs, right? Which means that you take the last 30 days, you take the last 60 days, and then you say I've spent X amount of money on this day on ROI campaign, and I've seen Y amount of revenue. If you plot, you will be able to plot this, right? You don't have to like plot it manually. You can just put it on Excel, and then Excel will plot it for you. Now, what it will tell you is, depending on how this diagram is, you can sort of infer something. Now, obviously, you'll also do your regression analysis. That will also tell you something. But the graphs will also tell you something. Let's look at a few graphs. In fact, your graph will probably sort of look like this, right? Because you're increasing and it will sort of look at diminishing. If you see a graph that is not diminishing, then the good thing for you is it means that you can keep on increasing on the sub-channel or on the particular campaign, right? So while you're doing this, you will see that there are some confusing shapes that might come about, right? So for example, you might do the same regression. You'll see that there are some outliers like this for some reason, right? Now, these are because there are on some particular days, maybe the bids were very different or you're not able to win your bid. So it is sort of showing up like this. Or on those particular days, for example, especially this means that you spent less, but you got very good net return, which means that maybe it's a Sunday where other people were not bidding or whatever, right? So you can't take this into your regular regression. You have to run separate regression if you have outliers like this. You can just remove those data points and then run regression for them separately because it means that maybe there is something else happening there. Maybe on that particular day, if you run a regression, you'll understand that 50% of your channel spends were probably going to Reels, and suddenly Reels is probably working well for you, right? It will also give you insight on maybe you should be spending more on Reels, maybe more than what you're saying, right? You can run a separate regression when you see something like this. Cliff is, you're seeing that there is a small X amount of stuff here, and then again there is a gap, and then you see that there is a certain amount of data here. Now this sort of means that the channel is working based on some step functions. Like for example, it is saying if your bid is $1, you're winning some auctions, but for whatever reason between $1 to $2 you're not able to win bids. because there is a lot of competition in that space. And then maybe after $5 and more, maybe again it is sort of opening up, right? So you will have to run regressions separately on these two, right? That's what this is. If you sort of have blending layers, it means that somehow you are mixing up two different subchannels into one, right? If you take all of the AdWords data and then you draw this, you'll probably find something else, because AdWords is not one homogeneous channel. You have display, you have YouTube, you have brand, which all work very differently, right? So obviously, if you see a shape like this, you would want to separate it out and go much more granular, go sub-channel and then do your regression, right? And if you see something like this, where it is just scattered, it is like a cloud, it means that you're looking at a very high level, right? You would probably want to sort of aggregate a lot. In fact, no, you're looking at a very micro level, right? Maybe if you're just looking at a very small niche, like let's say you're doing Facebook Messenger inbox, which is a very small inventory, right? So in this case, you would want to probably take more data together and then sort of aggregate it and then run the analysis. Otherwise, you'll not get much, right? But the good thing is, if you draw the regression, you will actually find if you are sort of hitting the limits of marginality or not, right? That is probably a good test for you to do it. Lift test is simple. We've done lift tests in the past. Geographic lift test, probably not, but we can just do a platform lift test, right? We will not do a lot of lift tests because this is mostly for offline channels. We will stick to our regression analysis and like live testing. But lift test is nothing but you are not exposing your experiment to one group and then seeing how is the exposed group behaving versus your control group, right? In this case, for example, Stripe wants to do billboards, right? So they want to do billboards in San Francisco, they want to do billboards in Los Angeles, and then sort of see what happens. If it is working well, they know that, yes, billboards are working for them in certain channel, and then how much amount of money that you want to spend on that particular sub channel, right? So same stuff. Live test is nothing but what we do, which is, yes, we are saying like we do this on our shopping campaigns, right? We say, okay, what is ROS? We say ROS is 200%. We want to say, okay, go from 200% to 100%. Now, what is the benefits is it's pretty accurate because it's live, which is why it is live testing. What is the drawbacks? It is instead of experimenting, you're experimenting on all of them, right? So we have seen this with our shopping campaigns. Suddenly they just go for a toss because you've changed the ROS so much, right? But it is still very accurate in that way. When you sort of do this live testing also, for example, it is sort of better to hold out and then do it, right? So don't do it on all of them. Maybe you want to do it on a certain portion of them. Like for example, why a certain portion of them is because you will see that there are a lot of other variables in play, right? Which is why for us, we can say, okay, let's do a holdout test, but we can do a brand holdout test, right? For example, you want to do it on Vedix first and then see how it is working and then do it on SK. That's sort of what we can do, because that way you're very clear that there is no external variable that is sort of impacting the results, right? All right, so that covers the theory of marginality. Like I said, again, it's sort of very clear. Now, this is how we typically measure marginality, right? So this is what Facebook guys sort of roughly look at. You're sort of looking at, for those of you like not Facebook, this is basically, let's say this is USA budgets, right? This is how many ads are running, what is the budget on those ad sets, how many number of orders you're getting, what is the amount spent, what is the CPA, right? Now, typically, like I said, marginality is nothing but those tax, right? Which means that with what is the X percentage of budget that you're spending and what is the X percentage of orders that you're getting. Now, right now, what is happening is we're spending 6 lakh rupees. The CPA is not, right? But this is the CPA that you're sort of saying, right? The average CPA is probably roughly somewhere in between these two, which is around 3,500 rupees. This is Facebook CPA. This is not the average CPA overall, right? Now, what we understand from this is if we want to increase the efficiency by 10%, you can actually very predictably say what is the CPA that you have to probably, what is the CPA that you'll probably have to do, right? Which means that you will probably not get the orders here, you'll probably get the orders here, right? Which means you'll get extra 10 orders here with an average CPA of around 5,000, which will increase the average CPA from 3,500 to maybe 3,700. That's what will happen. So I can tell Varma that, okay, I can increase the CPA, I can increase the orders by 10%, but my average CPA will go from 3,500 to 3,700. At the same time, look at this, right? So if I say that I don't want this percentage, right? You can't do this. This is a necessary wastage, but I can cut 10% of the spends, right? And I'm only probably cutting 7% of the orders, right? Which will actually bring the CPA down, by the way, to around 2,000 rupees. Which means the good thing with this is you say I can actually cut 10% of my orders, but my CPA will go from 3,500 to actually 2,500, which is a 33% decrease in CPA. So marginality will tell you very clearly and very predictably, it can actually help you project well, right? You know very clearly if X amount of money is being spent, Y amount of orders will come at Z amount of CPA. That is very accurate, especially if you have stacks layers across. Okay, now what are we gonna do in the next week, right? I want to see what are the decisions that we're taking. We're taking decisions at the platform level, right? We're saying how much should we spend on Facebook, how much should we spend on AdWords. Then you're taking decisions at a sub-channel level. We're saying how much should we spend on YouTube, how much should we spend on, let's say, discovery display in AdWords, right? And then at a campaign level, in YouTube, you have X amount of campaigns, where should you spend more? And then even in Facebook, let's say if it's on the main campaign, you're also saying how much should you spend on a certain ad set level. Like should you be spending 1,000 rupees, 1,500 rupees, 2,000 rupees? And then at an ad level, if you have multiple ads in an ad set, right? Now, I want us to sort of look at this at a very granular level and then say, for example, why I'm saying that is because we always do analysis 2 steps above, right? And you will get a lot more insight if you just drill it down by one level and then further drill it down to another level, right? So for example, if you say you have a great creative on which you've replicated, let's say 20 ads are running with that creative, and then the average CPA that you're getting on that creative, which is a proxy of ad sets, is around, let's say 700 rupees, right? The first question that you should ask is not to maintain it, but to say, so let's say you're doing 10 ad sets and 700 rupees. That means that you're spending 7,000 rupees on that creative. Your first question should be, can I spend 10,000 rupees on that creative? Or can I spend 15,000 rupees on the creative and still get 700 CPA, right? This is when your average CPA is roughly around 1,000. You should always ask that question as opposed to just doing the things on a very mechanical level. See, we follow a mechanical process because obviously there is merit in the mechanical process because it's a disciplined approach, right? But you should always think what can happen. Like, can you sort of say, on this particular creative, I can actually double it without increasing the CPA too much, which means that the worst creatives you can probably cut, right? Which is what we're doing. But you should be able to take those decisions looking at this data, right? And this data you will get at a very minute level. Facebook is giving you the data, AdWords is giving you the data, Amazon is giving you the data. You should be able to say, okay, can I actually increase it? Even at an ad set level, and will I be okay by sort of doing that, right? So what I want you to do is to sort of look at that data that we already have, which is a lot of data, right? So for the next session, I want you to sort of do this assignment, right? So on SK, I want the AdWords guys to sort of look at the smart display marginality, right? So we already do, I think we're spending on SK women, we spend close to around 50,000 rupees. 50,000 rupees, and then we get around 100 orders or so. I want us to see, can we increase that from 50,000 rupees to 70,000 rupees without, in fact, by decreasing CPA, not by increasing CPA, right? Which means, Vijay, you have to first understand what is the marginality of the display campaign, right? And the good thing with the display campaign is you'll have tools to predictably say what will happen at 10%, 20%, 30%. So you draw that table. And then you have to say, I think we've already clearly said display is incremental because it's GD, right? It is giving us retention customer checkouts. Obviously, cancellation rates are high, but it's still very incremental. So you have to say, can I go from 50,000 to 70,000 and increase the number of orders and not increase the CPA, but actually decrease the CPA, right? So that's what Vijay will do. On Verix, the Facebook guys will look at main campaign and sub-campaign marginality, right? Which means it's not just stacks at a campaign level, at a Facebook level. I want you to look at stacks at individual sub-campaign level. And then I want you to say which sub-campaigns are indeed marginal, right? So which means I want you to draw the regression graph for each campaign and then say which campaigns are not hitting the thresholds of marginality, right? And obviously, because you already done incrementality, you know which of the sub-campaigns are you can confidently spend on those campaigns, at the same time decreasing your CPA. Because why? Because you've not hit the limits of marginality, right? So that's what you'll do on Facebook. I want to see the graphs of each of the sub campaigns. I think you have maybe around 10, 20 different sub campaigns. I want to see the graphs on all of them. And on marketplaces, you guys are doing the ROI test. What I want to see is the same thing that I showed. I want to see the same regression thing wherein you're saying for the last 60 days of ROI, what is each data point showing? Are we hitting marginality limits? And at the same time, I want to see that graph I want to see the table like the Bloomscape table where we say what is the X amount of money that you're spending, what is the Y amount of revenue that you're making, assume a 25% CM2 on all revenue, and hence what is the ideal money that you should be spending on the ROI campaign, right? We should maximize your revenue. Okay, so these are the 3 tests that I had in mind, not tests rather, but these are the 3 things that we should be doing for the next session, and then we'll take it from there. Now, I want you guys to, I have put 2 more question marks here, which means that you have to tell me what are the other things that we can do from this particular session or from this particular theory that you've learned now. Okay, and the guy or the girl who will give me the best insight from this test will get a shot or something, not a shot, maybe something else.